We're going to be building this calculator using React, and it may look simple, but it's surprisingly complex and it introduces a lot of really important programming concepts. Welcome back to Web Dev Simplified. My name's Kyle, and my job is to simplify the web for you so you can start building your dream project sooner. And in this video, I'm going to show you how to build this calculator that you see on the right-hand side of your screen. And in most calculator tutorials you see, they're going to use some kind of math library that handles all the calculation for you. But in this video, we're going to be doing all the calculations on our own, which makes this problem a little bit trickier, but it introduces a lot of really important programming concepts you need to understand to be a good programmer. Also, this is based on a tutorial I did on a JavaScript only version of this calculator. I recommend you check that out after this video. I'll link it at the very end of the video so you can watch it and compare the React versus JavaScript version. Now to get started, all I've done is created a blank React application, and I just deleted all the files we don't need. And you can see we just have our simple React application. And if I just refresh this, you can see we have nothing at all in our application. So what we need to do is we need to add in all of the code for our calculator. So here's the working version. I'm just going to have that pulled up as a template. And we know that we need to have a div that's going to wrap everything. And we're going to give that a class here, which is going to be a class name of calculator grid. And that's because in order to do this, we're going to be using CSS grid to lay out our entire calculator. And if you're unfamiliar with CSS grid, I have a full video on it linked in the cards and description down below. Now the next thing we need to do is this black section at the top. That's going to be a div. We're going to give that a class name here of output. And that's going to have both our operand right here, which is what we're typing in. And it's also going to have this section at the top, which is going to be like our secondary operand or our previous operand. What we want to do is we want to have a div here. And this div is going to have a class name of previous operand. And that previous operand is what's going to contain both this number up here as well as the multiplication, divide, and so on sign. And then below this, we're going to have our current operand. And the current operand is going to be this larger number down here that we're currently in the act of typing out. Then after that, that's done for our output. We can move on to all of the different buttons inside of our CSS grid. So our first button here is going to have a class name here of span2. And that's because, as you can see, this all clear button spans 2 columns in our button grid. So we're giving that class of span2. And then also we're just going to put the text AC inside of this button. Now we're going to copy that down because we're going to have our delete button next. So del. And this one does not span, so we don't need that class name on it. Now after that, we can have another button, and this one's going to have the divide symbol here. A really easy way to use this divide symbol is we can just copy this and we're going to paste it into our page here. And then we can use that fancy divide symbol instead of something like this slash symbol. Then we need 1, 2, 3 and multiply. So let me just copy this down a few times. We can do 1, 2, 3 and multiply. Then we need to do 4, 5, 6, and we're going to have the plus sign here. Copy this down a few more times. We have 7, 8, 9, and we're going to have the subtract symbol. And then we're going to have 3 more buttons. We're going to have here the period. We're going to have the 0. And then our final button is going to be another one that spans 2 because this is the equal sign. So we're going to have class name span2. And we're going to put the equal sign into here. So this right here is our entire grid of buttons. And if we save this and we look over here, you're going to notice we just have essentially a bunch of buttons and nothing else. And that's because we don't have any styles yet for our application. So I want to create a simple style sheet called styles.css. And then inside of our app at the very, very top, I just want to import that styles.css. So this is going to import all of our styles from here, and then we can get started writing out all of our styles. The very first thing I always like to do is I always like to select everything. So my before and my after elements. And I just like to make sure to set my box sizing to border box. It makes sizing things so much easier. And if you're unfamiliar with why this works, I have a video on it. I'll link in the cards and description for you. Next, I always like to remove all the margin from my body. So we're going to set margin to 0. And also we're going to set a fancy background here. This is going to be a linear gradient. As you can see over here, we have this gradient that goes from blue to green. So we're just going to incorporate that. It goes to the right, starts out at a blue color, which we're going to use 00AAFF. And then it goes to a green color, which is going to be 00FF6C. Now, if we save, come over to here, you can see we get that nice blue to green gradient. And already this is looking so much better. Now let's focus on the grid, and this is going to really transform our entire application. So let's get our calculator grid. Make sure I spell calculator correctly. There we go. And we want to change the display here to grid. Then once we have display grid, I want to put a margin top of 2 rem just to space out the top of our grid. As you can see, it gave us a little bit of space there. And then in order to make our grid actually work, I want to have some grid template columns. So we'll say grid template columns. We're going to set this to a repeat of 4 and 6 rem. This is going to give us 4 different columns, and already that's starting to look pretty good. Then we want to have some grid template rows. So we're going to have our grid template rows. And this is going to determine the height of our different boxes. So we're going to set this to a min max here of 7 rem and auto. And the reason that we're doing this is that by default, we want our very first row at the top to be 7 rem, or it's going to expand to fill the full height. So if, for example, we have a really long number, if I just keep spamming this, you're going to see it expands onto the next line. So this is just making it so that this can grow as large as it needs to. That's what this auto is doing. And then we want to make sure we have all the rest of the rows. So that's just our first row. Then we need 5 more rows that are all going to be 6 rem. And that's because we have 5 rows of buttons. So that gives us this nice grid layout. Now what we have left to do is to actually make that span 2 work. So let's put in span 2. And here we want the grid column to be span 2. That's going to make it so that these buttons, such as AC and equal, now span 2 columns instead of just 1. We also need to specify our output to make sure it spans the correct amount. And we want our output to be essentially the entire top row. So we can just say that we want it to span from column 1 to column -1. And that means it's going to take up the entire top row. So now we have our output up here and the rest of our grid buttons following below. Let's finish out styling the rest of our output to make it just look like we want. We can set the background color to RGBA. We're going to give it a completely black color, but it's going to be partially transparent just so we can kind of see the blue-green color behind it. It gives it a cool look. And then we want to make sure we can lay out the text inside of here. So for now, I'm just going to put some placeholder text. Let's just say like, we're going to have a number like this, 123,234. Same thing down here, and let's put the multiplication sign, just so we can kind of see what this text looks like. Right now, it's really hard to see because it's black. So obviously, we probably want to change our color inside of here to be a white color. So let's take our output, and we're going to select the previous operand. And here I'm going to change my color to be RGBA 255, 255, 255, 0.75. So it's going to be entirely white, but partially transparent. Kind of gives us that nice off-white color. And then let's just copy this down for our current operand. And here I want this to be entirely white so it stands out a little bit more. And I also want to change the font size here to 2.5 rem. So it's going to be a nice and large font size. And then our previous operand is going to be smaller, so it's going to be a font size of 1.5 rem. So as you can see, that looks pretty good so far. Now the next thing to do is to lay it out. So we're going to, of course, change our flex direction here to column since we want it to be vertically stacked. Then we're going to align our items on the end. So we're going to say flex end. And I want to justify content space between. Actually, we're going to do space around here. The reason I'm doing this is just so it spaces these elements out as much as possible from one another. So as you can see over here, they're getting close together when we have a lot of room. But if we don't have very much room, you can see it puts space between them. Now we also want to have some spacing around the actual output itself. So of course, we're going to add in some padding. Let's do 0.75 rem. And then in order to have the words actually wrap properly, we want to set our word wrap to be break word so it can wrap. And our word break here is going to be break all. And this just allows it so that we can actually wrap. When we have a really long output like this, it'll wrap onto the next line like we want. And that pretty much covers our entire output section. Let's just finish up with these buttons because right now they are kind of ugly. So let's select our calculator grid and we're going to get each button inside that grid. We're going to change our cursor to be a pointer cursor. Our font size, we're going to make much larger to rem. As you can see, that already looks better. We're going to give it a border of 1 pixel solid white. And then we're going to remove the outline from it. We'll say outline none. And most importantly, we're going to change our background color. And again, we're going to make it partially transparent. So 255, 255, 255. That'll be white, and we're going to give it a 75% opacity. So as you can see, that looks pretty good. Then when we hover over it, so if we just take our calculator grid, get our button, get the hover state, and we're going to copy this down for focus as well. What I want to do is I just want to take our background color, and I want to make it a dark background color. So we're going to say, for example, 0.9, so it's a little bit more white looking. So now when we hover over it, or if we tab to one of these, you can see it now has that much more opaque looking color, which makes you know that it's selected. Now the last thing we need to do is just center this. So inside of our calculator grid, we can just say justify content in the center, click save, and that's going to center this object. And as you can see, these two calculators look almost identical. We can actually delete this fully working calculator because now we have the version of that calculator we care about. It looks pretty good. Now all we have to do is add in the functionality. And this is where most tutorials just download a library and they just do all the calculations for you. But instead, I'm actually going to show you how to do these calculations because it involves some really cool programming concepts. So for now, let's just delete out all of this placeholder text. We don't need it. And what we can do is we can focus on how we're going to do these calculations. In our case, what I want to do is I want to use a reducer inside of React to essentially manage all of the different state. So our state is going to be this previous operand, our current operand, and then the operation that we have. So we're going to come in here, we're going to say const, and we want to use a reducer. So that gives us state and dispatch. And that's going to be set equal to use reducer. And this use reducer is going to take in a function called reducer. So let's create a brand new function called reducer, just like that. And this reducer is going to take in here a state, and it's going to take in an action. And then it's also going to take in our default state, which is an empty object for now. And if you're unfamiliar with this use reducer hook, I have an entire video covering it. I'll link in the cards and description for you because I don't want to go into it here because it's pretty involved, but this is going to make doing our state so much easier. So also our state, as we mentioned, it's going to have a few different variables. We're going to have our current operand, we're going to have our previous operand, and we're going to have our operation. So now what we can do is we can just take our current operand, we can just place it right here inside of our React code. Our previous operand is going to go right here, and our operation is going to go right after that. So right now, this is where our state variables are going to be put into our code. So actual rendering of our application is super easy. This is pretty much all the code for rendering our entire application. Now the hard part is going to be our reducer, which allows us to manage all of our state for us. So one thing I like to do when I'm dealing with a reducer is I like to break this action into essentially a type and a payload, because we know that we're going to have a bunch of different actions, and we're going to have different types of those actions, and those actions are going to pass along some parameters. Then once I do that, I like to think of all the different types of actions I can take. So with this calculator, we have a few different actions. I'm going to put them into this global variable here. And the first action we have is going to be adding a digit. So clicking 1, 2, 3, the period sign, 0. So adding a digit is going to be one of our actions. So we're going to add that in to our actions object here. Another thing that we can do is we can clear out. So we can have a clear action. Okay. We can also remove a digit. So I can just type in here, delete digit. And that'll be delete digit. That's what happens when we click this delete button. If we want to choose one of these operations for division, multiply, and so on, we're going to have a action for that. So we're going to have a choose operation action, which is just choose. Whoops, choose operation. There we go. And then finally, the last thing that we can do is we can click this equals button down here, which is going to be the evaluate option. So we can say evaluate, and this is going to just be evaluate. So now inside of our reducer here, we can set up a simple switch, which is going to be switch on our type. And then we can say for each case we want to do something. For the add digit case, for example, so actions.addDigit. Oops, there we go, actions.addDigit. We want to run some code inside of here. And this code is going to return to us a new state object. That's just how reducer works. And then for the next case, we can do the same thing and so on all the way until we used all the different cases we can think of. So inside of the add digit, our state is really quite simple. We're going to return a new state object. We're going to take our current state and spread it out. And then we're just going to take our current operand, because we can only ever influence the thing that we're currently typing. And we're going to replace it by just coming in here and adding the current digit to the end of it. So we're going to have some string interpolation here. We're going to take our current operand, and we're just going to add our payload digit. So payload.digit. And this digit from the payload is just something we're going to pass to our reducer. So when we use dispatch, we would come down here, we would say, for example, dispatch. We're going to say our type here is actions.addDigit, and then we're going to pass in a payload, which is going to have a digit, and it'll have like 1, for example, as the digit. And here, all we're doing is we're taking our current operand, and we're adding on that digit to the end of it. And if our current operand is null for some reason, we just want to make sure we default to an empty string. So this will either create a brand new current operand with just our digit, or it'll add the digit onto the end of our current operand. Now, in order to actually see how this works, we need to start hooking things up. So coming down here where we have all these buttons, I want to replace some of these buttons with custom components. So I'm going to create a brand new component. We're going to call this the digitButton.js. And this is just going to be a really simple export default function, which is called digitButton. And this digitButton is just going to take in a single prop actually, which is our digit, and we're also going to pass in our dispatch so we can actually call our reducer from here. So then inside of here, we're going to essentially return a button. So if I just copy one of our digit buttons up into here, we can just return our digit button. Let me just copy that down. There we go. So we're just returning this button. Inside of here, we're putting our digit, and then on click, we need to essentially call dispatch. So we're going to say on click, we're going to call a function, and this function is going to be our dispatch function. We need to pass it in our type, which comes from our actions, and our actions are defined all the way up here inside of app.js. So let's make sure we export these, and we're going to import them inside of here. So we'll say import actions from, and that's going to be from app right here. So now we can say, for example, actions.addDigit. We want to pass in a payload, which is going to be our digit. So now if I save, you can see we have a button which has this digit, and it has an onClick, which is calling the addDigit function, and it's passing along the digit we want to add. So in our app.js, we can just come in here, we can say we want to import that digit button from digit button, and then we can take this down here anytime we have a digit. Instead, we can just replace this with digit button, and we can change our digit equal to that divide symbol. So let me just copy this over, make sure that this is inside of here, and then our dispatch is equal to dispatch, just like that. And now we just close this off, we now have this digit button working. And if I save, but it's actually not working, and that's because we have this dispatch down here. We need to remove that. And now when we save and we refresh over here, you can see everything's working. And if I click on this divide, it'll add that divide digit. Obviously, our divide symbol shouldn't be a digit button, though. It should be choosing an operation. So for now, we're just going to comment this out, kind of forget that this is there, and instead we're going to use our digit button to cover up the rest of our digits. So our digit here is going to be 1, and then we're going to copy this down a bunch of times. So we're going to have 2, 3, 4, 5. We're going to have 6, 7, 8, 9, 0, and we're also going to have a period. So 1, 2, and 3 here are going to replace this 1, 2, and 3. We're going to take the 4, 5, and 6. We're going to replace the 4, 5, and 6 down here. And we're going to take this 7, 8, 9, replace this 7, 8, 9, and then finally the period and the 0, and replace the period 0 down here. Now we've essentially just replaced all of these normal buttons with these digit buttons, and we can do the exact same thing for our operations, but we can just call these an operation button instead. So we just give it a new name. So we're going to copy this down to all these different locations. So we're going to have a plus symbol here. We're going to have a minus symbol here. This one is going to be a multiply symbol. Get rid of the old buttons that we had. And then instead of this saying digit, it should say operation. So I just want to copy that down like that. And now let's create that. We're just going to copy our digit button, give it an operation button name. And inside of here, change this to an operation button, change this to an operation, just because that's what we named it. Put that in our payload. And then here, instead of add digit, we want this to be choose operation. So we're choosing that operation and we're rendering that operation here. So now if I save and I go over to our app and make sure that we import operation button from operation button, you can see that now everything looks like it is working as we expect. We can click some buttons for our digits and it's going to add those digits. We can click operations, and of course, choose operation doesn't do anything, so we're getting a bunch of different errors. But if we implement choose operation, it'll work. But we still need to finish implementing add digit, because right now it looks like it's working. I mean, this looks correct, but the problem is what happens when we put a decimal? We can just add as many decimals as we want. That's not really that good. Or what happens here if we add a bunch of zeros? So if I refresh, you can see we put a bunch of zeros at the front, and obviously, again, that just doesn't make very much sense. So we need to think about these edge cases. So inside of add digit, let's put an if, and we want to say, hey, if our payload digit is equal to a 0, and our state.current operand is also equal to a 0, then we just want to return our current state. And by returning our current state, it means don't make any changes. Now by doing this, if we refresh over here, we click 0, it adds 1, click 0 again, and it's saying, hey, your output is already 0. We can't add more zeros because that just doesn't make sense, so just don't do anything. All the rest of the digits work fine, but that 1 0 is not going to do anything. So now what we need to do is worry about the period. So let's come in here. We want our digit to be a period. So if our digit is a period, then we want to see, hey, does our operand include a period already? So does it include a period? Whoops. If it includes a period and we're trying to add a period, just return our current state. So now if we refresh here and we type something out and then we click period and type again and then try to hit period again, it won't let me add another period because we already have one. So this is a beautiful way of just ensuring that we don't have, additional periods or we have too many zeros. This is just going to make it so much easier to work with all of our code. And then by default down here, we're doing like the normal update operation right here. Now the next thing we can work on is the clear operation because it's super straightforward and easy. So down here, I want to just set up an on click for our all clear button. And this is just going to be a function that calls that dispatch function. It's going to call dispatch. It's going to pass in a type, and that type is very simply just going to be actions.clear. There we go. We don't have to pass any payload because for clearing, we don't have a payload. Up here, we can just minimize this case and add a new case. And this case is going to be for actions.clear. And for this case, it's super simple. All we want to return is an empty state. And that's just because when we click clear, we just want to remove everything. As if nothing happened at all, we want to go back to our initial state. So let's just refresh, add a bunch of stuff, click all clear, and you can see it just wipes everything completely. This is beautiful. Now the next action I want to talk about is going to be for choosing an operation. So we can say actions.choose operation. There we go. And inside of this case, what we want to do is we want to check different things. So first of all, if we choose an operation and we have nothing typed out yet, obviously we don't want to do anything crazy. So if our state.current operand is equal to null and our state.previous operand equals null, then what we want to do is return our state. So right now, essentially, we have no state at all for our current or previous operand. So if I click any of these operations, it does absolutely nothing, which is perfect. Now the next thing I want to check for is, hey, if our state.previous operand equals null, but our current operand is also not equal to null because we've already passed this if check, then I know that we've typed in something here, but we don't have anything as our previous operand yet. So I just want to take our current operand, make it our previous, and set our operation. So this is where the real beauty of our calculator comes in. So we can take our state and just spread that out. Then what I want to do is I want to take our operation, and I want to set it equal to our payload.operation, just the thing we passed in. Our previous operand is now going to be equal to our state.current operand, and our current operand is going to be set equal to null. So all I'm doing is just making the current thing the previous, and that's about it. So now if I click multiply, and I just refresh here to make sure this takes effect, let's type in a number, click multiply, you'll notice that our current operand becomes our previous, our operation is saved, and now we can start typing in our new operand. But now we have another scenario to run into. What happens if I click multiply here? Well, what I want to happen is I want it to just do the entire calculation between this number multiplied by this number, make the evaluation equal to our previous operand, and then now we can start typing our new thing. Because when you're working on a calculator, if you click 2 plus 2, and then you click the plus button again, it's going to add 2 plus 2 to be 4, and then it's going to say 4 plus, and you can type in whatever you want next. So now we're just going to come down here, and this is going to be essentially our default action. So what I want to do here is just do a return. I want to return our state. What I want to do next after that is take our previous operand, and our previous operand is what I want to evaluate. So we're going to create some evaluate function, and this evaluate function is going to take in our state, and then we're just going to use that value. Then for our current operand, I want to set this equal to null, and for our operation, I want to set the operation we just clicked on. So we can say payload.operation. You'll notice this works very similar to what we did up here, but instead of taking our current operand and setting it as our previous, we're taking our current and our previous, calculating the operation from this evaluate here, and then setting that as our previous. So let's create that simple evaluate function. And this evaluate function takes in our state, which is our current operand, our previous operand, and our operation, just like that. So what we need to do is convert these strings to an actual number. So we can say const previous is equal to parse float of our previous operand. We can do the exact same thing for our current. We can say current is equal to current operand. And then what we can do is we can say, hey, if any of these don't exist, so if they are not a number for our previous, or if they are not a number for our current, just like that, then what I want to do is just return an empty string because we just don't have any calculation to do. Otherwise, I want to get our computed value. So we can say computation is equal to an empty string. So by default, we're going to say that our computation results in nothing. Otherwise, we're going to switch through a bunch of different statements for our operation. So if our operation is, for example, the plus symbol here, then we're going to do a plus calculation. So our computation is going to be equal to our previous plus our current. And we put a break right here just so we don't go into our next case statement. Then again, we're going to do another case. This one is going to be for minus. And here our computation is just going to be equal to the previous minus our current. And again, we're going to put a break. And as you can see, there's kind of a pattern here. I'm just going to copy this down a few times because we're going to have one for multiply and for divide. So we're going to get multiply, and then I'm going to come down here, copy the divide symbol up so we can use that same symbol, change this to multiply, change this to divide, and there we go. At the very bottom here, all we need to do is return our computation, and we just want to convert that to a string because everything we're dealing with is strings. So that is our evaluate function completely done. So now if I save, refresh over here, if I say 12 plus 2, and I click plus again, you can see it calculates 14 and gives me a plus. Now if I say 3 and I say multiply, you can see it calculates 14 plus 3 is 7, or 17, I'm sorry, so now we get 17 times. I could say 2, give me a plus, now we got 34 plus, and so on. Now there is one scenario that we're not covering right now, is what happens when I click multiply. Well, that just means I want to change from plus to multiply, but right now it doesn't work. That's because we haven't taken care of that. I need to check for when my current operand is equal to null. If I refresh here, we can kind of see what that looks like. That means I typed in 23, I hit multiply, and I'm like, oh crap, I meant to hit plus, so I want to hit plus here. So really all I want to do in this scenario is overwrite my operation. That's pretty easy to do. We can just return our state object, and then we can just say our operation is equal to our payload.operation. All I'm doing is updating our operation. So let's refresh this, do 12 times, and I'm like, oh, I meant plus. Well, I'm going to click plus. We'll do 3, and now it's going to work. We get 15. Now that we have this choose operation essentially entirely done, we can focus on our next button, and this button is just going to be the equal button. So I'm just going to copy this on click, and I'm going to go all the way down to our equal button, paste that on click in here, but instead we're going to have our evaluate action. Again, we don't have to pass any payload because we don't care about that. But what we can do up here is we can say, hey, we're going to have a case for our actions.evaluate. And this one's going to be actually pretty easy because we already wrote all the code for evaluation. What I want to do first is I want to check, do we have all the values state? So is our state.operation not equal to null? Or if it is equal to null, or if our state.current operand equals null, or if our state.previous operand equals null, well, that just means that we don't have all the information we need. So we're just going to return our current state, essentially do nothing at all. Because if you click equal, like if I clicked equal right now when it just says 15 minus, minus what? I don't know, so I don't want it to do anything. Otherwise, if we do have all of our state correctly applied, then we want to do the evaluation, where here we can return our current state, and then we can do all the rest of the code right below here. So for this, I want to set our previous operand equal to null. Our current operand is going to be equal to whatever we get from evaluation. So we're going to evaluate with our state. And then our operation is going to be equal to null. And that's because if we just click equal, that's saying, do 15 minus whatever I type in here, 3, for example, that should give us 12 and just put it down here as our current value. So let's just refresh and do exactly that. 15 minus 3 equals, and it gives us 12 right here. But one interesting note is if I hit 3, it gives me 123. In a normal calculator, after you do a calculation, if you click a digit, it should overwrite the value. So we're going to put a value called overwrite into our state. We're going to set that to true anytime we do an evaluation. And then way up here, when we're adding a digit, I just want to do a simple check way at this top. And if it says state.overwrite, if this is true, then what I want to do, instead of making my current operand equal to the next operand and so on, instead I want to return a state here, which is going to be our current operand, but I just want to replace our entire operand with our digit. And then I want to make sure overwrite is changed back to false. So let me show you exactly what I'm talking about. If I just hit refresh here, type in 12 times 3 equals, get 36. And now when I type 2, instead of adding 2 to the end of 36, it overwrites this value with 2. And I can continue typing from here and so on, times 6 plus 3 times 6 equals, and then when I hit 5, it's going to overwrite that value. That's all this overwrite flag does, and it's really important to have that. Now the last operation that I want to take a look at here is going to be for deleting a digit. So we can just come in here, we can say case for actions.delete digit. And this one is actually quite a bit more complex than you would think. First, I want to see if our state is the override state. If we're in the override state, then I just want to return an empty object. I just want to clear out everything. That's perfectly okay. And actually, instead of doing that, let's be a little bit more specific, because really all we want to do is delete the current operand. So we'll say current operand is null. Our state is going to be spread out, and then we're going to change overwrite back to false. So this is just being a little bit more clear exactly what's happening if we're in that overwrite state. Also, we want to do another check here to see if our state current operand is equal to null. And this is because if we don't have a current operand, we can't obviously delete anything from it. So we're just going to return our current state. Also, if our state.currentOperand.length is equal to 1, this just means that there's only one digit left in our current operand. Well, what we want to do is completely remove it. So here, I want to do a return where we take our state and our current operand, and I want to set this to null. And that's just because whenever we delete the last digit, I want to reset our value to null here instead of leaving it as a value of an empty string. And then finally, with all those checks in place, now we can do our default case where we just have our state and we take our current operand. And what we're going to do is just take our state current operand, and we want to slice this 0 and -1. And this is just going to remove the last digit from this current operand. So now, if we just minimize this down, we can go all the way down to where that delete button is, copy this on click into that delete on click here. And what we can do is we can say actions.delete digit, click save. And now if I just refresh this, 12, click delete, got rid of that, click delete again, it completely removes it. And if we, do like a big thing, now we have the overwrite state. If we click delete, you can see it removes the whole thing because of that overwrite status. Now you may think this calculator is complete, but we can actually make this even better by formatting these values. Because right now, this is a big number. What is this number? You have to count the digits. It'd be so much nicer if we had commas separating the digits for the thousands and the millions and so on. We can really easily do that by creating a integer formatter. And this is going to be for formatting the integer portion of our number. And this is going to be a new intl.number format. We're going to be formatting in the English format. So we're going to do ENUS. And all I want to do here is make sure that there are no fractions. So our fraction digits are going to be 0. This is going to be for formatting our integer portion of our number. And the reason we have to separate our integer portion and our non-integer portion is because if we come in here and I say, 12.0005, If I want to write this number out, I need to make sure that I don't actually do any formatting on this part after the decimal. Otherwise, when I type in 12.0, the formatter is going to be like, well, 0 is not important, so I'm going to remove the 0. And we need to make sure that keep that 0 in there. I'll show you what I'm talking about in a little bit when we write this function. So this function is going to be called format operand. It's going to take in an operand. And all we want to do is we want to split it on the decimal. But first, we want to make sure we have an operand. So we're going to say if operand is equal to null, just don't do anything. Return nothing. Otherwise, we're going to get the integer portion, and we're going to get the decimal portion by taking our operand and splitting it on the decimal. So if we have a decimal, for example, 12.0, our integer is going to say 12 and our decimal will say 0. While if we don't have any decimal, for example here, our integer will be 12 and our decimal will be null. That's exactly what we want. Then we can say, hey, if our decimal is equal to null, that means we don't have any decimal. All I want to do is just take my integer formatter, and I want to call the format function with my integer portion. This is going to be for formatting an operand. And let me just copy this down real quick, and we'll paste that down here so we can format our current operand, and we can format our previous operand. And now if we just refresh this and I type out, 122 and I click 2 again, you can now see we get 1022. And you can see that we get these nice commas showing up. Now to make sure that we have the decimal portion as well, here what I want to do is I want to just take our integer format, paste it down here, put a period afterwards, and make sure I do string interpolation inside of here. There we go. And then I just want to put our decimal portion afterwards. I don't want to do any formatting on the decimal portion. So now I can say like 12 dot, I can type whatever I want, add some zeros at the end, and it's going to work just fine. We get this nice formatting. I can do like ×2 equals, and you can see we again get nice formatting. And again, the reason I separated the integer from the decimal portion is if I ran this number formatter on the entire number, it's going to remove all those trailing zeros, which means we can't type something like 00005. It just wouldn't let us do that, which is why we had to separate these sections. And that's all it takes to make this React calculator. Like I said, I have an entire version of this in just pure JavaScript. If you're interested, that's going to be linked over here. And with that said, thank you very much for watching and have a good day.